All right, Candice, it's all you.
Emily, I can't hear you on my end, so when you're ready, just give me a thumbs up. There you go. We're good to go? Okay. All right. I want to thank you all for joining me today. I will tell you that I cannot hear you on my end, but Emily says that you can hear me on her end, y'all's end, so that's a good thing. So if you would use your mobile device or computer, tablet, what have you, and log into menti.com with that enter code there on the left side of your screen, or you can scan the QR code on the right side and it will take you immediately to it. And I am in it with you. So as you're logging in, if you haven't used Menti before, which I'm going to probably guess most of you have, at the very bottom down here, you've got these icons that you can interact with. The heart, if you love something I say, the thumbs up, yep, I love the thumbs up. And if you have a question, if you'll come into the caption icon, what it'll do is it'll post the questions to the very end of the presentation, so we can go over them at the end. And I have done a similar presentation to this before recently, and there were some really good questions about ungrading in very large classes. And I will tell you, it's very difficult to talk about a very large class in ungrading. And this is pretty much a general overview of 6 steps that I actually use to ungrade a lot of my content. So, oh, thank you. I love all the little emotions. Okay, so the login information will stay at the top of the screen. So if you don't get a chance to log in with that, that's not a problem. It'll be at the top. Okay, I believe. There we go. Okay, so give me 3 words, or any amount of words up to 3 that describe traditional grading in your mind. So what are some words that come to mind when you first think about grading? Traditional ways of grading. And I'm going to engage with you on my end and enter some words that I feel like kind of talk about, yeah, restrictive is huge. Okay, so we've got unfair, time-consuming, restrictive, inequitable, tedious, laborious, if that's how you want to say it. What else do we got? Assess. Yep, what we do, absolutely. Let's calculate. Let's see, percentages, absolutely. So we've got numerical examples with that. Obviously, that's what we do. We have it's a huge number grading system. Fairness does come to mind. Is the grading system set up fairly? Does it truly assess what the individual knows, or is it more reflective of how you're delivering the assessment? Let's see here. Rubric. I love rubrics. They take a long time, most of the time, to get them together. We're going to talk about rubrics here in a little bit too. Let's see. Daunting, frustrating, tedious. Yep. But the prevalent terms that you shared, time consuming, and grading is time consuming. And I personally would prefer to take that time instead of calculating a grade, giving the students deep feedback in order for them to find out what they know and what they don't know, so that they can refine their learning. So that's great information. What would you change about grading? If you could change anything about how you grade, how your college requires you to grade, how your institution expects you to grade, how would you change? And I am kind of known for being a rule breaker around here. I don't know how I got that reputation. By the way, I teach at Fayetteville Technical Community College in the Medical Lab Technology program. That is a new program out here. And I've been teaching in the community college system for about 10 years. And I love what I do, but I hate grading. I hate grading. I hate putting a number value on what students know, but that's what we have traditionally done. So oftentimes we stay with the status quo. So what would you change about grading? More authentic, more real world, more right then during the process. This is what you know, this is what you need to improve on. Better feedback. Feedback takes a long time. For me personally, when I'm teaching, I teach online courses for Winston-Salem State as well. And to really give those students a chance to find out what they know and what they don't know, I really have to give them deep feedback, and it takes me a long time. Use descriptive levels of achievement over a numbering system, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So that's what I really like to do. I really like to use descriptive levels, kind of like a checklist for a job when you're on a job. Let's see, I would include the effort and feedback, more compassion. Absolutely. I've got students in here who are struggling with finances, who are struggling with relationships, who are balancing 2 jobs and children. And we have to really think about the life that they bring with them. And oftentimes we silo ourselves into these things. So yeah, absolutely would include compassion. Improvement focus, absolutely. So we focus on where the improvement needs to be and not necessarily what you get right all the time. That validates students' learning, that validates their knowledge base. But if we could shift their mindset to that continuous improvement, that would be awesome. Less weight on student success. I feel like sometimes we talk about student success so much that it becomes a buzzword or buzz term, and it loses its real meaning in what we truly mean about student success. So awesome, it's good information. Okay, so we're going to talk about something that I call just grading. And basically, just grading is another term for ungrading. And ungrading meaning that we decide deliberately to take the numerical grades and the letter grades out of the equation and grade the individual based upon really deep feedback and that one-on-one rapport and knowledge sharing that the student and the instructor, the facilitator, have between each other. So I call it just grading because if a just system should be fair, right? It should take into account that there are a lot of factors in someone's life that could impact what is happening. And we want to make that as fair and as equitable as possible. So when we're talking about equity, what works for student A may not work for student B. So why are we assessing them with the same thing, right? When we make things more equitable as far as an adjust system, we customize that experience to that individual and meet them where they're at instead of having them meet us where we are in a standardized process. And a just system should be impartial. You should be able to eliminate those biases that you have or acknowledge those biases that you bring with you and be able to set them aside, or what we call in research, bracket them, so that you're aware of them, but you know that they don't affect your actual system. And obviously unbiased. We want to take that out as much as we can. So if you're familiar with a system called Just Culture, and some of you may be, some of you may not. Just Culture is a term that applies to a number of performance improvement initiatives that a lot of industries have used. A just system in human resources would be, before we write up an employee or put an employee on a performance improvement plan, we would look at the structure of the entire system and say, where did the process break down at? And was it truly caused by an employee malfeasance, or was it because the system wasn't set up properly? So in a just culture, we look at the entire system and we say, okay, this component is working because of X, Y, and Z, or this part of the process is not working because we failed to provide adequate instruction. So I like to think of of just grading as a just culture for my actual classroom. So whenever we deliver assessment, traditional assessment that might be multiple choice, unfortunately in our program we have to do that because at the end of our program, as with many cohort-based programs, there's some sort of national certification exam that they need to pass in order to demonstrate proficiency, and those questions are multiple choice. So oftentimes when we go over these questions, we look at the statistics behind them to prove if they were fair, if they were rigorous enough. And we decide, well, if almost everyone failed this one question, maybe it's not the students, maybe it's the question, and maybe it's because the instructor did not write a good question. So I look at every process that we have in this program, and I try to apply that just culture mindset. So grading is no different. So we want to create a just system for grading so that students actually have a fair chance to demonstrate what they know. So is your current system of grading just? Would you say that it is as fair as it could be, that it is as impartial as it can be, and that biases are eliminated from that system? And when I look at mine, because I have to report my grades, obviously we all report our grades to our colleges, in the traditional ABCD fail model, it's really hard to say it's a true just system when I ungrade in my class, but yet I have to transfer those grades over to the college to report them finally. And so most of us are probably want to say that we have a just system of grading, but when there's a gap in that, faculty controlled, yeah, right. So if it's more faculty controlled rather than process or policy driven from the college, it would create a more just system of grading. But unfortunately, our system is not set up that way because of accreditation bodies and rules and standards set forth by the community college system or the university system. So faculty are oftentimes very limited in what they can do, but there are ways around this, and that's why we're talking about today. So what things does not make your grading system just? What are some things, some characteristics that you feel like does not create a fair system of grading in your classes? So for me, as I think about this and I reflect on my own students, I see varying levels of differentiation is needed, right? So we've got those high performers in our class where you cannot get the content rigorous enough, right? You just can't. They want more, they want more, they want more. And then you've got students who can't tolerate any more than what you're doing because they're struggling to get there. So how can we grade them with the same instrument? So subjective rubrics, right? So rubrics are a great way to grade things because it sets those standards up, but a human creates them, right? Even if a computer created it, a human created the computer. So there's not really a truly objective rubric. You can try to get there, but it's really hard. Language bias is significant. We were just talking in here before in my lab amongst faculty about a lot of biases that we have culturally, and all of those biases actually impact the way we use our grading systems. Teacher decides the quality. So I like that statement because it makes me think, how do we define the quality, number one, of the instruction that we're providing? Number two, where's the student's voice in that? Where's the student saying, this is the quality I expect, and this is why I expect it, right? Time constraints are really big. So I don't know about you, but when I've got 50 students in a class section, and I do at Winston-Salem State, when I want to give them all of this feedback, it would take me hours to do it. And, are they reading it? Are they taking it? Are they using it? Am I providing them another means to actually show me that they have reflected and revised the content, right? Timing's huge. So education barriers. So I have students in here. I've taught in this 2-year program, high school graduates. I've taught individuals who have a GED. I've taught individuals who have a master's degree, all in the same cohort. So it is very challenging to make the system fair when you have varying levels of education and going on. And because I don't care how good of a teacher you are, differentiation is hard and it takes a lot of time. And so it's an uphill battle when we talk about creating that just culture within a classroom, but I believe it starts with ungrading. So what is ungrading? So ungrading basically is a suspension of those traditional grade practices for more equitable means of evaluation. And I pull that definition together from several scholars, one specifically being Susan Blum. I believe she is from Notre Dame, I think. Don't quote me on that, but she does a lot of work with ungrading. And there is another individual named Jessie Stomel, who does a lot of work with ungrading as well. So I like to read these scholars and just get ideas from them and then come up with what ungrading really means within my own context. So the information that I'm sharing today is more from my own experience using that information that I pull from them. But it is a suspension of that traditional grading system, which scares the devil out of administration. I will tell you, my dean, when she hears me talk about ungrading, she covers her ears. She doesn't want to hear about it. And I get it, because I might be breaking a rule to a degree, but I always do what's best for the student. And in my classes, if it decreases their anxiety level on assessment and it helps them learn better, I will always do it. Methods of ungrading. So we've got feedback, right? Feedback is one of the best ways to start ungrading, because you're giving that one-on-one personalized feedback to that individual to say, hey, you got this right. You nailed it, right? But this is where we could do better. And I actually don't like to say but. I try to eliminate that conjunction in my language now, because everything before the but is not good typically. So giving them that level of feedback that lets them know this is where improvement is needed helps them focus their attention more on that versus focusing on, hey, I got all of this right. Well, that's great. You get it all right. Let's let that go. You've already gotten it. Let's focus on what needs improvement. Reflection. This is something that I learned that students really don't do a good job at. And I can say that too as a student. It's sometimes hard for me to reflect and say, you know what, I didn't do good on this. I'm actually taking a course right now that I'm actually a little bit behind in. And the longer I'm behind, the less I want to reflect on it. That's just human nature. So incorporating reflection into ungrading is really important. And I do that by requiring my students to give me a reflection once a week. And I tell them, I ask them, what did you learn this week? What do you feel kind of confused about? And what are you totally lost on? That gives me more information to personalize the experience. And then levels of proficiency. So if you think about being trained on the job, we usually have a job performance checklist, right? And I don't know about you, but in healthcare, we typically have 90 days to learn all of these tasks, right? And at 90 days, they could let me go or keep me, right? That's a probationary period. But I've got all of these tasks. And on this checklist, all I've got to do is say, did I meet it? Did I not meet it? Do I need improvement, or am I proficient? Why are we not grading our students like this? Why are we not giving them these leveled or this structured form of feedback in the degree of work that they're doing rather than a number, if that's what they're doing on the job? So as far as feedback goes, you want to make sure that it's rich feedback and that it's deep textually and verbally. So I know in Canvas, and I'm sure some of you probably use Canvas, Canvas has a way that you can record feedback. I grade on my app, on my phone all the time because the app's awesome, but you can record verbal feedback. And that does such a huge motivator for students because they hear your voice and they connect with you. The text-based feedback is great because that gives it to them. They can go back and look at it, but telling them exactly where they need to make improvements on and expecting follow-up on that is really important. And it's got to be highly specific. Provision of extra resources. So if you give them feedback, always make sure that you spiral back to extra resources that actually reinforce what you're telling them needs to be done. So it's one thing to give them the information and it be very deep, but it's another thing to provide them that information and then give them extra resources that they can use to expand on it. And then clarity in refinement and retry. My students I have them for 5 semesters. And so we build connections that last forever, right? And I'm very fortunate in that. If I taught English or something, I might not have that time to build that relationship. So it usually takes about 6 to 8 weeks for my students to truly understand, hey, when she says I can refine it and retry, she really means it. She's not just saying, hey, refine it and retry it, and I'll give you half credit. I give them full credit, because learning is a process. My highest performing student might get it right in 1 week, and my student who's struggling might get it right in 3 weeks. But guess what? They both got it right, and that's all I care about. So allowing them to refine their information using your feedback and retry is really one of the cornerstones of ungrading, so that they know exactly what they can do to hit the mark. Reflection. Students, and most of us, don't really know how to reflect unless we're, a little bit older. I'm 29, so I'm still learning. But reflection, always start with goal setting. And I like to think about what we call self-regulated learning. So we have a lot of students that come to us and they may not know how to self-regulate, so they're not as successful in their online, maybe asynchronous courses, or any course for that matter. We start by having them set weekly goals. So based on the work that you did this week, where are improvements needed? And we start with that goal setting and say, this week I am going to master this concept, right? But it's got to be measurable. How are you going to know that you met that goal? So I teach my students on day one how to write learning goals. I teach them how to make sure their goals are measurable. And I let them know that every week that you're going to have to set at least one goal, a performance improvement goal, so that we can track your progress. And then that reflection and refinement. So it's very much a cyclical process, whereby we set the goal, we measure the performance, we modify our behavior, or the way that we're studying, or the way that we're learning, or the learning activities that we're using, so that we can meet that goal if we don't hit it. So this is really, really critical. A really critical part of ungrading is that you incorporate reflection, so the student starts to learn that practice. And then proficiency assessment. So if you're looking at the graphic on here, the A1, the A2, the B1, this is just a random graphic that I found to put in here. But on the right-hand side of that graphic, you see those levels where we've got mastery, where we've got advanced, where we've got intermediate, okay? And it's actually backwards from the way that the letters are going. But that proficiency assessment helps that student see that goal and helps them attain it. So if I know that the highest level of proficiency I can get is highly proficient, and I'm at proficient, then I still have work to do. So this is where I fall back on that feedback from my instructor and being able to reflect on my performance. Proficiency level assignment. I'm going to show you a table here in a minute or two about how I use a legend that helps me assign these varying levels to student performance. And then iteration. I can't emphasize enough the importance of encouraging your students to keep trying. I had a student today. She messed up everything in lab, totally. And this is her second go around in the program. So I would expect her to have a higher degree of proficiency than students who haven't been in the program before. She didn't get one task right. That's okay. We sat down, we talked about it. We talked about where her error was. She actually talked about it, because I never tell them. We talk through it. And then she tries it again. So the mistake is part of the learning process. And it's hard for a student to understand that when all you have really known is, I've got to get this, and I've got to get that, and I've got to have an A, and this is not good enough. Whereas the mistake is how you learn. After we fixed one problem, she dropped a slide that she had just stained and was getting ready to look at on a microscope, and it shattered on the floor. And she was very frustrated. She wanted to run out of here. And I said, you're not going to leave just yet. I said, we all break things. It's quite all right. And I actually, thought about picking up a slide and dropping it on the floor myself, but I didn't do it. We talked through it, and it's that persistence, that grit, that resilience that all of these mistakes have to bring with them to the table in order to get that proficiency level up. So it's iteration. Iteration is a key to ungrading, allowing them unlimited opportunities to actually practice the task. I like this quote: innovation happens when people are free to think, experiment, and speculate. That means that they have to be willing to fall down. They have to be willing to make mistakes. They have to be willing to know that, you know what, I'm not going to hit the mark every time. If my students came in here and did everything perfectly, I would not need to be here. None of us would. That's why we teach, because we're sharing the knowledge that we have in order for others to use it and grow, right? So if we want them to innovate and think critically, right, we've got to give them the space to try, fail, and try again. And to me, that is what makes ungrading a good thing, because it doesn't penalize them for the mistakes that they make. So here's 6 steps to ungrading. And at the end of this, I'll have a QR code for you that's going to take you to a piece that I wrote for a blog. And so all of this information is in there. And again, this is how I do ungrading based on the research that I have done. There's 6 steps to ungrading. We're going to go through all 6 steps of these. I'll tell you a few things about what I do. And if you have questions, just pop them into the icon down there and we'll talk about them. So the first step is to throw out the numerical and letter grades for the students, but keep them as a rubric for yourself. So there's an activity that, fortunately, I think, we're on a 2nd level here at one of the campuses of the college. We're not on main campus, and we have windows that open, and there are no screens on these windows. So it shocks me, because I could open the window and literally jump out. So I haven't said that to anybody because I don't want them to shut the windows down. But grabbing a handful of birdseed as a student and throwing that birdseed out the window and thinking, these are my letter grades, these are my number grades, it's very liberating. And when you do that as an instructor and you allow students to do it, it changes the learning environment. So when I say throw out the numerical and letter grades, I literally mean throw it out the window in the form of birdseed, obviously. This is the ungrading legend that I like to use when I ungrade. So I call it Ungrade on the left-hand side. It's that level of proficiency, like you would see in a job performance proficiency checklist, right? So for us here at the college, in order to pass any of our health science programs, you have to have a B or higher. And we're on a 10-point scale here. So if you have anything less than an 80 in a class, you fail that class, right? Well, I have students all the time that score 79. Does that mean that they're not, they haven't hit the level? Well, to some people here in health sciences, that does mean that. I've seen students dismissed from programs for missing 80 by 0.6 of a point. And that's very frustrating to me. So what I do is I have proficient and highly proficient. In order to pass, you actually have to have a level of proficiency that states you are proficient at the task. That's equivalent to a B. If you have anything less than proficient, meaning anything less than a B, you get needs improvement, not proficient or no performance. And I keep this information to myself as I track their work. Okay, so if I have a student who does a quiz, and on my end, I can see that they made a 91. They get a grade of highly proficient. They have a test and they make a 75. They get a grade of needs improvement, but they also get feedback. So the key to it is, if you use a legend like this, still have a way to numerically on your end equate that level of ungrading with what it would mean to your college. Because at the end of the day, if I were to give Fayetteville Tech a highly proficient score for one of my students, they're gonna say, what is this? I don't know what this means. So you have to have a way to transfer that into what the college expects to get from you. So your legend might look different than mine. Your words might be different than mine. That's okay. But as long as the students understand what this means, they'll oftentimes buy into it. And you always have some people that don't. But it's important to keep this rubric, because for some students, they won't buy into it. And they'll want that numerical grade. And so having that flexibility is important. Step 2, commit to providing your students with deeper feedback and on a regular weekly basis. So it's really hard to give that feedback in very deep and all the time, especially if you have got students who, you've got 50 students, you've got a lot of students. I'm fortunate. I have 20 in my first year class here, and I have 14 in my second year. So I don't have 50 students in one section of a class or two sections of a class, not here at Fayetteville Tech. But what I do try to do is I call this programmed feedback. They get it on the same day each week at around the same time, and it's structured. So every Friday around 10 a.m., they know that they're going to get this feedback from me on their performance for the week. Anything that was graded that week, they're going to get their level of proficiency. And so they are knowing to expect it. And the structure usually comes on what your grade, your ungrade is, what you did right this week, what needs improvement this week. And what happens over the following 2 to 3, even 4 weeks is they begin to expect this feedback on that day around that time in that structure. It's habituation, right? And automaticity. So they don't even realize that they are expecting it, and definitely don't miss the 10 a.m. mark, because you have students, where's the feedback at? I need to know how I did. So, and that's a good thing, because that's what you want them to see. So same weekday, approximate time, same structure, however your structure is going to be, just so that it's clear to them and that they know exactly what you need them to do. Step 3, clearly explain your ungrading scale to your learners. And you want to ensure that is outlined in your syllabus and within your course content. Just because you throw it out does not mean that there's not measurement there, because there is measurement there. You've got to have a way to convert your actual text-based ungrade to that numerical grade, because at the end of the semester, you're still reporting it to the college. So the scale needs to be flexible with the students who want the number. So you want to make sure that if you've got that student who is just adamant, no, I do not want highly proficient. I want to know that I made a 99 on this test, and they won't bend. Guess what? You need to be flexible with them, because the policy of the college is not that you give them the ungrade. The policy is that you give them the grade, right? So be innovative in grading like this does have its challenges, but if you provide flexibility in how the students are getting their measurement of performance, it's actually customizing your class more to that individual student. You want to provide that legend. So you want to show them what proficient means, what highly proficient means, what needs improvement means. Whatever that means in your class, you want to set forth that standard at the beginning of class so that they understand what it is. And they may come to you and they may say, you gave me highly proficient on this, and you gave me feedback, and you said that I did everything correctly, and to improve upon what I'm doing, I need to do X and Y, okay? Maybe X and Y would have given them 100, whereas without X and Y, maybe they had a 95, right? So that's just one way that you can be transparent with them about your grading. And you want to frequently discuss, and it should say ungrading, I'm sorry, it says upgrading. It should say you want to frequently discuss your ungrading model, because the more you talk about it, the more they are going to own it. They're going to accept it. And sometimes they may not, and that's okay. But the more you make it a part of your class, the more it becomes how they're being assessed, and how they are learning and using that information to grow within the purpose of the course. 4, rubrics are a must. So I love writing rubrics, absolutely love writing rubrics, but I hate how much time they take, because they do take a good amount of time. And the first way you really want to start with a rubric is, what do they need to be able to know? What do they need to be able to do, right? It's that cognitive and that psychomotor domain. And effective, in most cases, it should be effective too, that you've got to incorporate in there. But the rubric should be the guide to successful performance. So the student should be able to take that rubric and say, all right, I got to get highly proficient on this. I need to do all of these things in this column. And if I do all of these things in this column, then I should get highly proficient. So it's the guide, it's the roadmap for them in order to achieve that highest level of proficiency. You need to use it for grading all submissions. So I know in most LMS platforms, you've got rubrics that can be incorporated and you can use for grading. We all have our favorite LMS. Some are easier to use, some are harder to use. Some of us may be indifferent to the platform, but I really like using the rubrics that Canvas integrates, because I can just click, 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 add feedback and submit, and it's good to go. But make sure if you have a rubric that you're using the rubric, and ensure that there are clear criteria from the student's perspective. Keep the terminology easy to use, because remember, if they're using the rubric to do the assignment or complete the task, you don't want to use those task-specific terms that are higher level. You want to use those terms that they can really understand, as if they really didn't have the knowledge walking into the assignment. So you want to make sure that you're writing it from the student's perspective. Step 5, you want to plan for regular substantive interaction, RSI, which we've all heard of, augmented with what I call broad and narrow feedback and learner reflection. So RSI, as we know, is part of the Code of Federal Regulations now, CFR, and it's a requirement when you're teaching and engaging with students online, right? So you want to make sure that your ungrading model takes into account RSI, and that the feedback that you're giving actually is customized to the student. I like this image because you've got a broad river and a narrow road, right? That broad river has a lot of things in it, right? And it's harder to cross. You might need more information, whereas that narrow road is small. It doesn't take as much. It might be more specific to getting you where you need to be. Feedback for me, broad feedback is for the entire class. It's the macro level feedback. If you're looking at just your class, it's feedback that every student can use. Whereas narrow feedback is at that micro level. It's at the individual level, where this is customized to my student, Heather. This is customized to my student, LaShonda, right? This is customized to my student, Kevin, what have you. They all three get the broad feedback, but yet each of them gets specific feedback based on the work that they've done. This is where the time-consuming process comes into play. And it gets very frustrating, because you only have so many hours in the day, and you've got so many committees that you're on, and you've got to do this paperwork. And how am I supposed to give my students this feedback? This is where it really boils down to what's best for the student. And this is where hard choices for me have to be made, because when I answer the question, what's best for my student, to give them specific feedback, or for me to fill out this piece of paper that's due tomorrow morning, I choose to give the specific feedback, because my purpose here is to teach them. And granted, the form to fill out for the colleges is important. I'm not saying that it isn't, but I need to make sure that I'm giving my students what they need. So I do try to carve out time for feedback. Fridays are kind of like my catch-up day. And I don't know any teacher that doesn't work at home. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, but it's all in the focus that you have on your students. This provides personalization and customization. And I will honestly tell you, from what I have seen, I have been on both sides of the teacher coin. And I think we all go through hills and valleys with teaching, where some days we feel like we're just not hitting the mark, and we kind of, I don't want to say not try, but we kind of relax a little bit, and we're like, okay, we'll get to it, right? Then we have those days when light bulbs click in our students, and we know that we've made an impact. Today was one of those days in this lab, and I actually had a couple of students text me to tell me, I loved the lab. I learned so much today. And it's because today was very personal. Each student got me for the amount of time they needed. One student may not have needed me much, but I was there. Another student may have needed me the whole time. I was there. I was there for both of them. That's how feedback should be. You've got to be able to give that student who needs a lot of narrow feedback, you've got to be able to give them that, and understand that that student that doesn't need as much, they don't need as much. You don't need to go in super depth for that narrow feedback, because that's personalization too. That student who's that high performer is understanding that you're acknowledging the fact that they actually have mastered content. Step 6, plan for reflection. So always integrate reflective practice into that feedback. So asking the students, think about what did you learn this week? What's causing you confusion? How can you modify what you're doing outside of class in order to help you meet that learning objective? And how can I change what I'm doing in class to help you learn better? So this weekly reflection turns into more of a journaling process the longer you do it, and students become accustomed and build a habit in reflecting on their performance. And for healthcare and any industry, any job, you really need to be able to think about how you've performed, what went well and what didn't go well, and how you're going to make that improvement on the things that you didn't hit the mark on. Most people don't like to hear what they did wrong. I mean, I don't like someone coming up to me and say, you totally messed up and you don't know what you're doing. And I'm not saying you should ever do that, but that's sometimes how we feel, because we get this sense of rejection and this sense of, I'm never going to be good enough. So having the students reflect on their own performance, they tell themselves where their improvement needs to be, rather than you always pointing it out. If they can beat you to it, if they can beat you to where their improvements need to be, then you've done your job teaching them how to reflect. Okay, so the steps to ungrading: throw out the numerical letter grades and letter grades. Commit to providing your students with feedback. Clearly explain your grading scale, ungrading scale. Definitely use a rubric. Plan for that RSI, and then plan for student reflection. And all of this is in a QR code that I'm going to share with you in just a second. So I want to ask you, what are some challenges that you think could surround ungrading? What are some things that you could foresee being problematic and causing you to maybe either not do it or challenge the status quo and say, I'm going to do it and give it a shot? So there are a lot of challenges around it. That's the first one. I knew it would come back. Yep. And student pushback is the second one. So pushback from admin is significant. So like I said, when my dean hears that I ungrade, she covers her ears. And I always say, hey, I'll stand against anything. I'll do whatever, you know, I'll stand up for it. I'll take the hit. It's not on you, right? Because we are in such a status quo for how grades are. That's why that grading scale, that ungrading scale, that legend is so important, because you can align your grading system to that standardized system with the college. Student pushback is a big one too, because you do have those performers who got to get that A. I got to get that A. Why don't I have 100 average in here, right? So oftentimes they really need that numerical number because it's so ingrained in them. The LMS is a big one, because if your grading scheme is set up for ABCD or the percentages, yep, you've got to, there's no room for adjustment in there. You would need to stick with that. But I'm fairly certain that there are other grading schemes that could be actually integrated. Poor communication. If you are not someone who likes to give deep feedback or gives deep feedback consistently, that could come off as poor communication. But poor communication also comes from the student's perspective too, right? Because they may not be meeting you in the middle as far as reflecting on where their performance needs to improve. Time requirements. That's what I find to be most challenging for me. I can deal with admin. If I'm a rule breaker, I'm a rule breaker. I can handle that. They're still going to get the letter grade at the end of the semester. I mean, they don't get the numerical grade, at least here they don't. They get the letter grade, right? So I'm still going to meet the expectations of the college. I'm just customizing to my students. I can handle my student pushback, because if you need the legend, I'm going to give you the legend. The time requirement is where I get the biggest challenges from, because it takes me so much time to give them the feedback that they need. Even if I copy and paste the broad feedback, still that narrow feedback takes a while. There is a lot of gray in this area. How do you define highly proficient and proficient, right? And I've always thought that too on the job. How is it that, I'm proficient in this? What defines that? That's where that rubric really gets granular. So that's where you can put in those specifics on task performance or what they need to be able to know, what they need to be able to do, and get very, very specific. Again, that takes a lot of time creating that rubric. Positive feedback is really important. You always want to start with positive feedback. Always start and end your feedback in a positive tone. Sandwich that improvement in the middle of positive feedback. That really helps. This is good. This is good information. Okay, so college policy, we talked about pushback from admin. If the policy says that your grades have to be reported as a lettered grade, then you really don't have any way around it, at least where we're at now in higher education. Accreditation standards play a role in that too. So obviously we're assessed on everything through SACS and other national accrediting bodies. So we want to make sure that we're adhering to those standards. Resistant students, that was the second one that popped up. So oftentimes you do have that, but you also have students who like this model, but there's a trust factor in there. Oftentimes the students who don't want to do it this way might not trust you yet in being able to do it. So my recommendation for ungrading is to take small steps. And the first being that feedback. If you can't do broad and narrow feedback, do really deep, broad feedback. Copy and paste it in there if that's what you need to do. Or if you are face-to-face with the students, make sure that each student gets you, is able to access you as they need you. Inadequate feedback, that's a big one because you don't have the time, right? So you might not be able to get super deep with the student because you don't have the time to provide that feedback online. Or if you're face-to-face, you know, I need 30 extra minutes, maybe they don't have it, maybe you don't have it. And then untimely feedback. If you don't get it to them when they need it, then they're never going to use it. That's why establishing a pattern and a set program day to do this is really important. So if you want this information, this QR code will take you to my blog post, and it's actually on Brian Beatty's HighFlex community blog. So if any of you know Brian Beatty, he's actually, if you want to call him a guru of HighFlex, he can be. Actually was honored to work with him this past summer at an institute in Arizona. And he actually took me on as a mentor. So I was so excited about that. So I've got 2 blog posts on his website, but feel free to check it out. There's more information in the blog post about each one of the steps. And there's links in the reference section to actually take you to the resources that I use to come up with these 6 steps. So feel free to snap that. And I don't think we have any questions, but what I'm going to do is just pop over here and make sure, and then I'll pop right back. No questions, so I'm going to pop right here. If you ever have questions about ungrading or anything related to instructional design, I have a terminal degree in instructional design and instructional technology, and I love learning strategies. I love instructional strategies. So if you ever need anything or want me to chat about anything with you, feel free to contact me. You can reach me through the organization. You can reach me through Emily. And I really appreciate you popping in today. And I hope you give at least part of this a try, whatever might work for you, even if it's only deepening your rubrics. That's heading in the right direction to a more just system of grading. So I want to thank you, and I hope you have a great remainder of your week.
Yes, thank you so much, Candice. I know you can't hear me, but thank you all for attending, and we will have the recording up on our YouTube channel hopefully later this week for anyone who wants to go back in and check it out. Thank you all.